boy. You good?
Me too. I'm tired, but I'm
Oh, Dad, you're all dusty.
Rocky, hey, buddy, come here. Come on over. Well, I'm glad to see you too. Good girl. Come on. Come on. Hey, how's that sweet girl in there? Good? And how's this sweet girl?
No, go in. Get cleaned up.
Fine, fine. Let's go in. Take the kids. Come on. Good.
Inhale. Take a
I need some New York.
Oh, look who's here.
Hey, everybody. This is my favorite gang. Good? Good. Rocky, hey, come here. Hey, Rocky. What's up? What's wrong? Rocky, come here. Come on. Come on. What's wrong, Rocky? You're moving awful slow today. What? Huh? You all right? What?
I don't know what it is. He's been like that all day. Here you go, sweetie. Thanks.
Sue, you home?
Okay? Yeah, I'm in here.
Hey. Hey, was Stevie home from school?
Yeah, he's not feeling well. He's got a headache. He's a little constipated. It's just some kind of bug.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Rocky, how's he doing?
Jeez, Joe, I think you have to get him to the vet. He is not any better.
Oh, Rock, what's up, man? What's up? Why don't we see if we can't get him in the vet today?
Yeah, I think we should.
All right.
Wow, Rocky's real sick. He's got lead poisoning. Yep. Any idea where he could have been exposed to lead?
Lead? No.
You let the dog run loose?
No.
Do you live in an older home? Usually, this kind of poisoning takes place over a long period of time. We have to figure out where Rocky could have picked up enough lead to poison him. What do you do for a living?
Construction, demolition mostly. Why?
You wear protective clothing? Gloves?
No.
I think we need to get your whole family tested right away.
For most people, work and home are separate worlds, so we don't often see how work practices could affect us at home. But if you're exposed to lead on the job and you don't take precautions, you could be exposing yourself and your family to a very real danger. Lead is the oldest recognized occupational hazard. Hippocrates realized its effects on miners as far back as the 4th century BC. Now, modern research has proven that lead is a health risk, and in 1993, OSHA created a new regulation to protect people in the construction industry from exposure to lead. So how do you avoid the risk of lead exposure? To find out, you need to ask yourself some questions. What are my chances of running into lead on the job? How does lead get into the body, and how will that exposure affect me? And what can I do to protect myself? In the demolition industry, we may run into lead more often than some of the other trades. Demolition operations such as cutting and burning steel, scrap handling, sandblasting, paint stripping, equipment dismantling, and general demolition of coated members can all put high concentrations of lead dust and fumes in the air, which means the people working in these areas can be exposed to the hazard. And that leads us to the next question. Once you're exposed, how does lead get into the body? Lead enters the body in 2 ways. You can inhale the lead fumes and dust in the air, or you can ingest it by eating food or smoking cigarettes that have been contaminated by lead dust. The effects of exposure can be either acute or chronic. These effects are easier to understand if you put it in terms of our industry. If you want to bring a building down quickly, you might use explosives. The effect is acute. That is immediate. No building, just rubble. That's the same with an acute effect from lead. You'll feel the symptoms right away. On the other hand, you can take down a building piece by piece. It's going to take a while, but you'll eventually have the job done. That's the chronic effect. Exposure to small amounts of lead over a long period of time may affect you years after exposure. You see, the problem with lead is that it builds up in our bodies. Our bodies can handle a small amount and get rid of it naturally. But if you're exposed to too much lead or over a long period of time, it builds up in the organs and bones. Your body experiences what they call lead burden, and that can cause real problems. So what does lead do to your body? It can damage not only the circulatory and nervous systems, but also organs like the kidney, liver, and brain, and also the reproductive systems of both men and women. It can mess up your sex life and even cause birth defects. If you want to know what the symptoms of lead overexposure are really like, let's talk to some people who know firsthand.
The symptoms that I had were numbness, tingling throughout my body. When I lay down, I didn't know if I was going to keep getting dizzier and dizzier and hit a state of unconsciousness. That's how bad I was.
Acutely, lead can cause numbness and tingling of the hands and the feet. It can cause irritability, mood swings, that sort of thing. It can cause decreased sex drive and infertility problems in men and women. And over the long haul, it can cause kidney damage and toxicity to the brain.
There's no doubt about it, lead exposure is bad. But how much lead can cause problems? OSHA has determined how much lead we can be exposed to using a measurement based on an 8-hour period. Air monitoring is used to find out the amount of exposure. Air monitoring is done when someone on the site wears a personal sampling pump while performing a task. This pump measures the exposure level by simulating the rate and volume of air a person breathes, and then measuring the amount of airborne dust on a filter. Then the filter is sent to a lab, which will send back the testing results. Air monitoring works well, but if you're on a short job, you'll be done with the work before the results get back. So there are a couple of other ways to determine lead exposure. One way is to use air monitoring results from an earlier job that had similar operations and worksite conditions. You can also check the blood lead level of employees that have been exposed to lead. But the best way to find out what the exposure is and how to protect yourself is to ask your supervisor. Basically, you can protect yourself in two ways: with engineering controls and safe work practices. Engineering controls are the first way to prevent lead exposure. These are on-the-job methods of cutting down the hazards from lead. Some engineering controls include using exhaust ventilation with a dust collection system to capture dust and fumes right at the source, using long-handled torches or shears for cutting operations, which gives operators some breathing room. Vacuum blasting on steel structures instead of open air blasting reduces the lead hazard, and using vacuum trucks for major cleanup when needed. When it's practical, using sealed enclosures with negative ventilation and HEPA filters around lead-producing operations will also prevent exposure. Another engineering control is limiting exposure to the smallest number of people possible. You can do this by keeping work areas where lead exposure is a risk, regulated and off-limits to all employees except those required to do the work. Engineering controls are the first line of defense, and they should go a long way in reducing the risk of lead exposure. But there's another way to reduce the risk, and that's by using safe work practices, which include personal protective equipment. How do you know what kind of protection you need? Your employer will provide you with the proper respirator, and he'll train you how to use it. But it's a safe bet. For using a torch, you're going to need a respirator. Now, there's a number of different respirators. Now, here are 4 that are commonly used. A cartridge-type respirator with a half mask is effective for low-level exposures. The cartridges used are HEPA cartridges, designed to protect you from lead and asbestos, and they're usually magenta colored. A powered air purifying respirator, or PAPR, uses a blower to pass air through a filter, which removes the contaminants, giving you filtered air inside of a hood or a facepiece. This kind of respirator is self-contained and battery-powered. It's important to know that if there's no oxygen in the air, these respirators can't help you. They only filter the available air. They don't provide an air supply. If your work requires you to enter an oxygen-deficient atmosphere, you'll want to use one of these respirators. An airline respirator uses a supply line to deliver a source of clean air to the facepiece. This system supplies air from another location and must be used with an emergency escape bottle. A self-contained breathing apparatus, or SCBA, uses an air supply tank on the user's back to provide clean air to the full facepiece. Your supervisor will help you determine which respirator is right for the job, but having the right respirator isn't enough. The respirator must also be properly fitted, because if it doesn't fit right, it's not going to protect you from the hazard. I know what some of you are thinking, and there's just no getting around it. Wearing a respirator takes a little getting used to, but it's worth the effort. And if it fits properly, it's not going to take long to get used to it. Take the time to make sure it fits, because if it doesn't, you're going to be uncomfortable, throw it back of the truck, it's not going to protect you there. Respirators aren't the only personal protection equipment you'll need. Lead dust can get on your skin, your hair, your clothes. So it's important that you also wear protective clothing. Coveralls, gloves, hats, shoes, or shoe covers should be supplied to you at least once a week. And if your exposure level is high, you may have to change more often. The kind of protective clothing you need depends on the task you're doing and the amount of lead you'll be exposed to. To keep lead out of clean areas, take off protective clothing at break time or at the end of the day, and remove lead dust by vacuuming or going through a decontamination facility. Be sure not to blow dust off because that just puts lead right back into the air. So make sure that protective clothing is properly disposed of. Showers and separate storage areas for work and street clothes help you make sure you're not taking any lead home with you. There are other safe work practices that can also protect you. It's dangerous to eat, drink, or smoke around lead fumes or dust. Make sure you wash your hands and face before eating, and have your lunch in an area that's separated from the work site. Collecting and removing lead waste also involves safe work practices. Surfaces should be kept as free of lead dust as possible by regularly vacuuming with HEPA filters.
I hope everybody realizes the dangers and the reality of lead poisoning, because if you don't take the precautions, sooner or later it's going to catch up with you.
In the demolition industry, there's a very good chance you're going to run into lead on the job. And if you're using a torch, your chances are going to be even greater. Even a pipe that looks like the paint has been removed can still have residues that can produce lead fumes and dust. So your best defense is to choose to work as safely as possible and protect yourself. Engineering controls such as HEPA vacuums and safe work practices such as personal protective equipment and washing your hands can all help reduce the risk of exposure and contamination. Lead may be the oldest occupational hazard, but with the information we know today, we can work safely and know what we do on the job won't affect us or our families at home.
Here, Dad. Dad.
Oh, good grab, good grab. Got another rebound.